Yeah. So Sarah, thanks for joining us today. So I'm interviewing a few different people in the department about some of the similarities and differences between counselor education and practice, that doctoral program, and also the counseling psychology doctoral program. And so I'm going to interview Dr. Dispenza, who is the lead of that program, and also Dr. DeBlair, who is the coordinator for the counseling psychology program. And then I wanted to talk to a couple of students who went through our doctoral preparation track. And so I know you kind of did the informal version of that. So you kind of participated in some similar structures that were designed to help prepare you for a doctoral program. And you were also my GRA for 2 years, and we were working on the mindfulness book, and you also helped with a variety of papers. And so I wanted to interview you because you were considering really even towards the end, both counselor education and counseling psychology, and you ended up picking counseling psychology. And then I'm also going to interview Vanessa, who she kind of had a similar process. I think she may have kind of made a commitment a little bit sooner, but she ended up going into the counselor education and practice program. And I kind of sit on the faculty of both of those groups. And so I wanted to just give people a general sense of what the process could look like. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about just what that process was like, you know, that 2-year period when you were kind of thinking about whether you might want to do a doctoral program, and then what it was like for you to kind of make a decision and how you decided that counseling psychology was a good fit for you.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me and letting me kind of talk about this process, because it's been a little while since I've thought about actually sitting down and trying to make a decision. And I think first off, this is really awesome that you're doing this, because I found the process very confusing and at the time, and in part because I was in a master's program for mental health counseling, and I had not even considered a PhD program in my life. And honestly, coming into the master's was not on my radar at all. So I knew I was interested in your research and positive psychology constructs. And I was intrigued at getting to do that kind of work while also learning how to help people. And as I started engaging with the research of it, I realized I liked kind of the nerdy aspect meets how do we take something kind of big picture and create ways to practically help people that have been shown to be effective, or, you know, a variety of ways that we could use research in ways that benefit people, and learned about counseling psychology and counselor education. And a lot of the people who would teach my courses were either professors or they were in the doc programs. And so I started learning about both. And in our program, there's a lot of overlap. And so a lot of counselor ed and counseling psych students are in the same classes. So pretty soon I was like, what's the difference between you two? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
It was very confusing. And I think in part because different people would give different answers when I asked that question. So for some people, there's a very distinct difference between counseling psych and counselor ed in the identities of what it means to be a counselor ed student. And in large part, there's like a history behind how these programs came to be. And I understand more why those identities are similar and different. But at the time, it was just very confusing. So you have these kind of theoretical concepts where counselor ed, counseling psych, how are they the same? How are they different overall? But then practically, once I realized, oh, I like learning, I like research, I like teaching. I got to do some teaching when I was in the master's program, I like mentoring and different things that I enjoyed and realized I could learn more about, and also continue my education path towards things I could potentially engage all of those things together with, like being a professor, working in the counseling field still, and a variety of other things. So I started asking more and more questions. But it was this hard process.
So, I mean, what were some of the things that you ended up learning that helped you differentiate the two? Because I have a similar sense. Like, I usually try to be pretty neutral. And actually, part of the reason I formally joined the Counselor Education and Practice program was when Vanessa was coming through the team, it actually seemed like that program might be a really good fit for her. She was already in a school counseling program, and I could see that if she finished that degree and then also got her PhD, that she would be in a really good position for jobs. And so I didn't want her to feel like she had to choose between kind of being part of a team and kind of our group and, me being invested in her as a mentor and what program she would be a part of. So that's actually a big part of the reason that I was formally kind of assigned to the mental health counseling program and the counseling psych program, but at that point I wasn't formally involved with the PhD program. So that her process looked quite different, but like all of the master students that I've kind of seen come through, I mostly just tell them, like, ask a lot of people and be prepared. Like, people are committed and you're going to basically hear things that don't totally fit together easily because people are they have commitments to their perspective and they really like what they do. And that's a good thing. So I am kind of curious if you remember some of the things that started to clarify for you, I guess that would distinguish the two programs in terms of what would end up being a good fit for you. Like, do you remember what that process was like? Because if I recall correctly, that I do remember that actually, I kept saying, like, it's okay for you to wait, like be careful about it. You actually could apply to both, but when you go on interviews, they're going to want you to be able to explain why you picked their program. So I think I was kind of trying to balance the pragmatic aspect where, you really can actually apply to both. And, part of the process is just getting in. But on your cover letter and when you interview with people, I mean, it's actually not a good answer to say, I like both. I could see either. I don't know that it's quite a negative, but there's a little bit of almost there is a reaction when someone applies to, say, the counselor ed program and then says that they want to work with a faculty member that's not in the counselor ed program. It almost indicates like you didn't quite know what you were wanting, Does that make sense? So anyway, I think there is a little bit of implicit bias that people want you to have kind of started to make a commitment professionally, which I don't know if that's totally realistic for people who are kind of still getting used to it. I mean, some of what you learn about those areas you learn once you become immersed in the community. So I don't know that we're being entirely fair by expecting that commitment. But I think to some extent, the master's programs are trying to promote a certain commitment to kind of KCREP and ACA. And so I think there is a general expectation that if you're in a KCREP program, you would have already had a chance to kind of start to have a commitment to counselor education. And then, I think counseling psychologists have their own distinct identity and, want to know. In many programs, ours is the first one I've experienced. I was in a psych department, so really the contrast for us was why counseling over clinical. And so we kind of differentiated ourselves relative to clinical. And so this was new for me to kind of contrast ourselves relative to counselor ed. But so anyway, do you remember what that process was like for you to kind of start to feel like you understood a difference? Or, it may not have been the abstractions. It may have just been some of the just logistical or specific details of what you saw yourself doing and what seemed like a good plan to move towards that career?
Yeah, I think at the end of it all, it did boil down more to practicality than professional identity. But I think as I learned more about what each field kind of entailed, it helped me clarify that counseling psych was actually a good fit. So I think it's interesting. Like weeks before I applied, I remember, I think I told you this, where I was like, I think I've decided I'm going to apply to Counselor Ed. And then like a week later, I applied to Counseling Psych.
I do remember it came down to the wire.
Yeah, it really did. I was like, which one? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, it was slightly stressful, but I do think where I was stuck is that I was and am very interested in working in the university setting as a professor. And at the same time, and so if you are interested in teaching, 100% interested in mentorship and teaching, Counselor Ed can make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You can teach master's level, PhD level, and that it's really, I had such a wonderful experience with the professors in the master's program. I was like, this could be a really cool way to go. And since I knew that was probably my main interest, Counselor Ed felt more and more like this would be a good fit. And I didn't tell you this at the time, but at the same time, I was having a lot of conversations with my partner about our future and having kids and that kind of thing, and realizing because of his job and just some of aspects of living in Atlanta that I was pretty bound to location, and recognizing that we're fortunate in some ways. Atlanta has a lot of programs here relative to, say, middle of nowhere Iowa. Might have one university within who knows how many 100 miles, but that has a program, a Counselor Ed or a Counseling Psych program. But also even seeing my mentor at the time, and still Stacey McElroy, applying to all of these universities and recognizing, wow, it is really hard to get a tenure track position or just even a part-time position, I would assume. And then recognizing that Counseling Psych was more flexible for that it offered not only the potential to be a professor, to work in research, but also to have a degree that is needed if you want to do things like assessment, to have the name psychologist, where if I wanted to do work with clients, there's not a great reason for me, there wasn't a great reason to be in Counselor Ed. For some that want to learn and want to, go further in their research or just engagement and what it means to work with clients, you can do that, but you're not gaining any credentials. You're just gaining, I guess, experience, expertise in certain areas. So I made the decision based on the practicality of being here and being okay with, if I can't find a place in a university to work after I graduate, I still have other tangible things I could do,
Yep. Yeah. And I do remember that. I remember you were doing your practicum with Chris Noble, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, in a certain way, I think there are a lot of similarities of Counseling Psych and Counselor Ed, and we have some shared history and some of the kind of emphasis on multiculturalism. We actually look to some of the same people as kind of foundational figures in some of those shifts that happen, and some of those people were involved in both Counselor Ed and Counseling Psych. So there really is so much similarity. I remember going to a plenary session with the president at the time, and he mentioned 3 distinctives of counseling and relative to psychology. And the things that he said were the exact same things that counseling psychologists say. So I had a few experiences that, that really we are very similar in certain values. And I'm going to talk with Dr. Dispenza and Dr. DeBlair about their sense of, kind of what the the differences were just ideologically and some of the professional commitments that led to those distinctions. But I mean, one key aspect is that counselor education is focused on master's level training, and they really made a commitment to that's the future of mental health care, and that was kind of put in a central place. And so, it sounds like in your decision, because you knew that you might be geographically bound, you wanted to kind of keep a broader range of practice options open. And so the PhD level licensure actually gave you more flexibility that you felt to kind of continue to develop expertise, and it might have more flexibility in terms of future career options and maybe even leadership positions, things like working in the VA or various options. And it sounds like your general sense was that the main reason to get a degree in counselor education and practice was you knew that you wanted to be a faculty member and kind of teach master's level counselors, which I'm kind of curious to check with Franco to see if that's his general sense. Currently, that's my sense. It is a little bit cleaner decision. Like, I think there are people who don't end up doing that, but I think that's much more clearly the focus of the program is we're training you to basically be able to, it could be a research one, it could be more, it could be a variety of different types of university, but my general sense is that it is more focused on preparing you for a training role. And then counseling psychology, I would say if you looked at all the programs across the country, we probably actually have maybe more people who are going into clinical work than academia. And then there are probably some other different careers that people are pursuing even outside of those options. And so I don't think this dynamic is quite as strong in our program, but like if you go to psych departments, sometimes there's a general sense that to get an offer, you have to say you want to go into academia. So people get coached, even if you want to be a clinician, say that you want to go into academia, So anyway, yeah, I mean, I think there actually, like, as we're talking, there are a few confusing parts about both, if you were just looking at the process in one area or the other, there's a lot to sort out. And then when you're kind of trying to figure it out in a department that has kind of intermixed counseling psych and counselor ed in a lot of the classes, I can definitely see why that would be a little bit hard to quite figure out what the main fault lines are.
Yeah, and especially when there would be, two people in the two different degrees saying that they wanted to do the same thing. And it wouldn't, at the end of the day, it wasn't going to be the same thing, but it sounded the same. I want to teach students and do research in this area of interest. And, both counseling psych students and counselor ed could say that. Yeah. Or I want to work with clients.
So I could probably edit this out, but have you ever had buyer's remorse?
No, not at all. No, I'm more certain this is the right fit. Yeah, and it is interesting because there is, at least in our departments, there are personality differences, and people talk about it, and it's not so black and white, but it is interesting how people will say, oh yeah, counselor ed, they're the touchy-feely ones, and counseling psych, we're the, the more analytical, or there just are some slight, whether it's the floor, or it is actually, you have the scientist practitioner model versus like a wellness model oftentimes is what they talk about. They kind of focus on. So, but again, I think both would claim, to be into wellness and into science and practicing. So yeah.
No, yeah, that's true. Well, I wanted to ask you just one more question. Thank you so much, Sarah. We regularly have master's students kind of working with the team, and also we're going to have Amon has led the doctoral preparation track, and that's something that we plan on continuing. And so our students are regularly kind of trying to figure this out, and no one's going to have the exact situation you had. It's kind of every person's process is different. But when you're talking with master students and you're trying to help them navigate the process and maybe find it a little bit easier to kind of figure out than you did, like what kind of things would you say, or what things have you said when you've kind of talked to some other students who are kind of trying to figure those things out?
Yeah. 3 things come to mind. Let's see if I can not forget them as I talk about them. So one is that I really am interested in their story and like wanting to know what they're passionate about and like what do they have an image of where they're going and what's their why, essentially, because this is a lot of work just to be in a PhD program, regardless of which one. And so I'm interested in the why, and sometimes that in itself can be really clarifying if they can actually, write that down or, paint an image, like either the kind of metaphor or overarching, like, here's what I want my life to be like, or very specifically, I want to do X, Y, Z. I want it to look like this. Here's why.
Yeah.
The second piece is that I got this advice, and I've said it to a couple people. It's a tricky one, but essentially, if you ended up hating what you were doing, that you don't have to stay in the program. And in fact, like, it could be possible to get into the program that the buyer's remorse piece, that like, it's not common. I wouldn't tell people, yeah, just do whatever and then just change it willy-nilly. But that I think it sounds like such a huge commitment, and it is, to say I'm in a PhD program, that it can almost feel like this impending doom if I choose the wrong answer, or if I get into it, I have to complete it. And the reality is, you could do all the right things, and a situation could come up in your life that would make you need to pause the program or decide, like, this isn't me anymore, this doesn't fit. And so there's only so much you can do to prepare to know your future, which is very, it's just a lot of things outside your control.
Yeah.
But, so to try to take the pressure off a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, it sounds like for that piece, you did feel some of the commitment pressure, like that being part of either of these professions was kind of a big deal to people in them. Like they, it mattered, it's kind of like meeting people from Texas. Like Texas has its own culture, It's probably the only state I've ever been to where the state identity kind of eclipses the national identity. And in a certain way, I feel like the professional identities have a certain feel like that. And it probably, in my mind, that's important because it gives a sense of cohesion and purpose. And doc programs are long, so I mean, it helps to kind of believe you're doing something for a good reason. But on the side where you're trying to figure out which community is a good fit, sometimes that pressure can be hard to sit with. And so yeah, that makes a lot of sense that it was helpful to just realize, even if you got into it and realized it wasn't a good fit, there's always room to kind of shift. I mean, we actually have had students, you're right, it's not very common, but in cases where it's really clear that that's going to be best for someone, I actually think Dr. Dispenza and Dr. DeBlair have been very supportive of people kind of getting to what's going to be a good fit for them. So the challenge with it is just an admissions problem. So you actually do have to get admitted into the other program, and the admissions process is competitive for both programs. So
a third thing that I have offered or think about is, even within the program itself, not even saying that you would switch from counselor ed to counseling psych or vice versa. You can change your mind, and often people do, of what they want to do after they finish, and that in most cases, it's reconcilable in your field, that you can do what you want to do and just pave the way of what that looks like, because there is this overlap that oftentimes there aren't a lot. Like if you were to say, like, now I know I want to do assessments, well, kind of, there's only one way to go there. But most things, you can kind of find your own path.
Yep. No, I agree. When I was making some of these decisions, I actually had no idea what it would be like to be a faculty member. So you were much better acculturated, and almost all of our students are better acculturated than I was. I didn't really know, but I was attracted to mentoring and kind of training roles, and I knew I kind of liked that role. And so to me, getting a PhD seemed to provide more options for things like supervision and training. And so I was looking for the flexibility. So I think you're right. And I actually think in both professions, there is more flexibility with a PhD. Like there are career tracks that are open with a PhD that you wouldn't have with a master's in counseling. I think that's true. And then I think specifically with psychology, I do think there are a few options that are unique to having a PhD level license. And so I think you were right in that regard. In a certain way, if you knew for sure that you wanted an academic position, you might have had a better chance in the greater Atlanta area in counselor ed, actually. And, I remember us kind of talking through these different aspects. There were some pretty subtle kind of weighing totally unpredictable things, we really don't know how all these things work out, so it does kind of, we're the happy lab. We focus on humility. Like there is a certain humility to realizing how little control you have to predict kind of perfectly how everything's going to work out. But it did seem like part of your process was kind of sitting with the ambiguity of some of those things and kind of trying to make the best decision you could that could kind of unfold in a way that you weren't sure. It could go this way, it could go that way. Who knows? Things could change, and things do change. Like we're 10 years ago, I would have never guessed that APA would have moved into master's level training, but apparently they're getting into that game in certain areas. So, things do change, and you don't know for sure. So, well, is there any other things that you didn't have a chance to say? I can tell even just remembering it, you can kind of remember, you can empathize with the master students who are kind of struggling with these kinds of questions. Is there anything that you'd say just, kind of encourage folks and kind of help them figure out, these aren't things you can kind of figure out in a day, but are there any things you might say that would just kind of encourage people to kind of stick with the process and kind of have a larger roadmap to understand what it might look like?
Yeah, I would say that it's important to take care of yourself during the process, because you could just go kind of like unravel. And kind of related to that, the cool thing is if you let it, the process in itself can teach you about who you are, what matters to you, and that it's actually a really growing and humbling experience. And that's a really cool thing. It's scary, and you're putting yourself out there, to be, taken in or rejected, and also just figuring out, again, who am I, what matters to me, what's important, where am I going? But what cool questions to have to ask yourself. And so kind of tapping into that energy, to that excitement is really important. And so sometimes it does mean you need to like take a break from it actually and recharge in a different way, just because sometimes it's in leaving it that you find the answers that you're looking for, like in the shower or on a walk or something that had nothing to do with just agonizing over what's the right answer, or asking the 10th person what their experience was. So maybe that'll, trigger something, so.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah, just kind of trusting some of the implicit ways of thinking and not thinking you can figure everything out analytically, but just kind of trusting yourself and trusting some of your own intuitions just to kind of let things settle in, and that you'll eventually, you will kind of know what's the right decision for you, and just to kind of trust that. Yeah, that's good. Well, Sarah, thanks so much. I think this is going to be really helpful to people just to kind of hear a few examples of what this could look like, and hopefully hearing from Vanessa, and I may ask Aman if she has anything she would share after she kind of listens to some of these interviews, because she's done the doctoral preparation track for a couple of years, so I imagine she'll have some thoughts as well.